Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. Today is Monday, June 3rd, 2024, and I'm the host of the show, Cara Santa Maria. And as always, before we dive into this week's episode, I want to thank those of you who make Talk Nerdy possible. Remember, this show is and will always be 100% free to download. I used to sell a lot of ads on the show. You've noticed that has really dried up, and that sort of happened across the podcast community. So unfortunately, we're pretty much completely reliant on support from folks just like you. And so many of you have shown up over the years, and I'm just so incredibly grateful. And I know that the listeners who, are not in a position to support, which is totally okay, that they too are grateful for the really generous support of the donors to the show. So if you're interested in making a per episode donation, all you've got to do is visit patreon.com/talknerdy, where you can learn more. And of course, as I always love to do, I want to thank in person the top donors this week. They include Anu Bharavaj, Daniel Lang, David J.E. Smith, Mary Neva, Brian Holden, David Compton, Gabrielle F. Jaramillo, Joe Wilkinson, Pasquale Gelati, and Ulrika Hagman. All right, so I always say this, but this is a fun one. This is an exciting one and an important one for me as well. So about a month ago, I was invited to give the keynote address at the Western Canadian Reason Conference, We Can Reason, which took place in Calgary. And it was such a warm and inviting and just lovely conference that was presented by the Rocky Mountain Atheists that I wanted to make sure that I had one of the people who made this entire thing possible. And I'd say in some ways, the person who had just a whole lot of influence on this entire thing. She is actually the president of the Rocky Mountain Atheists and the co-chair of the Western Canadian Reason Conference. So she really is a driver of the culture, of the programming, and of all of the wonderful work that they are doing. Her name is Janalee Morris, and in her everyday life, she's also the manager of learner equity, diversity, and inclusion at a local college there in Canada. And so, yeah, I'm going to let her describe everything that there is to describe about this incredible work that she's doing. So without any further ado, here she is, Janalee Morris. Well, Janalee, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Cara.
I am excited to talk to you here one-on-one with, all the listeners, of course, about some of the really cool things that you've been up to. So I met you a few weeks ago as of this recording. I was actually about almost exactly a month ago, I was invited to speak at the Western Canadian Reason Conference, We Can Reason, and you are the one who invited me.
Yes, and we were so pleased to have you.
It was such a fun time. I had never been to Calgary before, so that was really exciting. And there were a bunch of people there that I'd known from sort of different atheist and skeptic conference, and then I made a bunch of new friends as well. So I figured maybe before we talk about this year's event, and before we really talk about your role in putting on these conferences, I'd like to first learn a little bit more about you personally. So you are an educator, right? Is that a good word to use?
Yes, I think that's a good word.
Okay. And so what is it that you do in education?
So I have worked in student services my whole career in areas of access for students who we would say are under our protected grounds, under the Canadian Charter. For most of my career, I've worked with students with disabilities. And now I also work with students under any of the protected grounds, and they work with my team to gain access to education in whatever format that means for them.
And so how does that for the American listener or even the listeners that are overseas, what does that term protected grounds mean? Is this any individual for whom they're like I think about here in the US, we do sometimes use the word like protected class or protected status in the workplace, and that often refers to like women or people over the age of I don't know 55 or so what specifically does that mean in Canada?
So I think it's very similar in Canada. So we're talking about people with physical or mental disabilities, people under religious grounds, ethnic grounds, women, gender, sexual identity, sexual orientation, place of origin. All of those things are protected against discrimination. And so
Right. So if any folks who have like historically been treated unfairly due to some, characteristic or trait that they either have no control over or that they, regardless, they shouldn't be treated differently, are protected in Canada. And you work to help make sure that they have a good experience in the classroom. Like you work to make sure that that is actually enforced.
That's right. Yes. So typically, students would come to my staff and disclose to us what the barrier is that they're facing. So, for example, sometimes a student with a disability might need to have an alternate textbook. Format, so we can get that for them, or they might need some other kind of tech services that we can help them get, or we have students who, for religious reasons, they might have a test scheduled on a day when they have a religious observance that they need to take part in. So we can help them reschedule that, or sometimes you might be pregnant and your due date might be right at the time of your final exam, and so we can help manage your schedule to make sure that you're not being disadvantaged by something that's really out of your control, and so that you can still access education.
Oh, that's wonderful. And is that something that the Canadian government, obviously the protected status is governmental, but are the sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Like the accommodations, are they financially supported by the government, or is it something where your individual schools and school districts have to kind of find the funding for that?
So, in my province of Alberta, we do get designated funding from our provincial government to provide services for students with disabilities. But all of the rest it's an obligation. It's a legal obligation that all post secondary institutes across the country have to meet to make accommodations.
Yeah. So regardless, you got to figure it out.
That's right, and it does have to come out of the big budget.
Yeah, 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 that makes sense. Well, what a cool job and what like I don't know, it sounds like it must be such a fulfilling job to know that the work that you do is directly facilitating or aiding in these young people learning.
It's so fulfilling. It's so important. Every day, I get to see the fruits of my labor. I get to see people who, historically would have been barred access to higher education. Likely, they wouldn't even have gotten the chance. They wouldn't have gotten to higher education. And through a few quite simple uh, changes in the way that people can access the content that we're asking them to learn, we're allowing them to attain certificates, diplomas, degrees, to get good meaningful jobs out in the workplace, to become contributing citizens. It opens doors
That's
to
very
meaningful lives.
cool. And, I'm curious. I mean, this may be kind of a weird stretch of a question. Maybe it's not even an important question, but I'm curious how your sort of, your day job, this work that you do that's so important, relates or does it relate to this secondary work that you found yourself doing, which is in the sort of skeptical activist space or the kind of the space of bringing people together to promote critical thinking in a safe and protected way.
It's very connected, although I don't think I really thought about it until recently. Um, the work the work that I do in the skeptics atheist community is about it's about building community. It's about having a safe place for people to come together who are like minded, who can engage in difficult conversations. Um, but it's also about dismantling some of those historical ideas about who's a valued person, who gets to participate, and how do we make those decisions? Do we make those decisions based on 1,000-year old text that in and of itself is pretty misogynist and racist, and not doesn't really take into account the true diversity that exists, that is that then directs people to make decisions based on that kind of knowledge, um, which to me is, as a society, if we're going to move forward, then we need to be able to question those beliefs. We need to know how to find good information. We need to be able to make decisions for ourselves based on evidence, and we have to know how to do that, and we do that through education. Um, Sometimes people think it's funny that part of my job is to defend, a person's right to practice their religion. In fact, one of the spaces that I oversee is our multi faith room, where people come to pray, and in whatever way that that their faith dictates. But it's so important because if we don't have those safe spaces on our campuses, then people of different faiths can't access education. And education is where we plant those seeds so that people then can ask some questions and can find for themselves, what their truth is, and where they're going to find their information. It's where we expose them to things like, finding peer-reviewed references, and how to evaluate those. I think about COVID as an example. When people were deciding whether they were going to get vaccinated. And, people didn't make those decisions based on what what the public health people were saying. People made those decisions based on what their auntie was saying, right? Or what someone from their community was saying. And if we don't have people from all of those communities who have who know how to evaluate scientific information, or if we don't have someone who's a nurse in this community or who's a lab tech in that community, then that whole community doesn't have someone to go to ask those questions, or to advocate for things like go and get a vaccine because it really is the safest thing that you can do for yourself and for others. So so to me, there absolutely is a tie between those things. Also, part of being an atheist is really, freedom to be a religious, or freedom to be religious, freedom of speech. All of that is also a very important tenet, and we can't have a democratic
Yeah,
society without that.
so many things come up for me in that, like, wonderful answer to that question, and I think one of the big ones is that you mentioned that sometimes people within our own community are, like, surprised or almost, I don't wanna say scoff, but are, like, confused by the fact that you are working in your day job to protect the freedoms of religious people, and then at the same time, you are sort of working as an atheist activist, or at least you're kind of vocal in these atheist spaces. And it's so funny to me when I hear, because I see the same thing. I work in end of life, right? So obviously, I'm doing a lot of work to honor the religious beliefs of my patients, and it's like being an atheist doesn't mean that I'm anti-theist. I just don't believe in it. It doesn't mean that I think you shouldn't believe in it.
I think that I think that people should be able to choose. And by that, I mean people should have access to all of the information to be able to choose. So it does really bother me when people don't have access to any books outside of their religious canon,
Right, or they're never exposed to
or
anything secular because their religion prevents them from doing
right.
that. Yeah, because then it's like, are we talking about a
That's right.
religion or a cult? Like, this is a low information bubble.
That's right. Yeah, I remember having some Mormon elders, and I use the word elders in quotes,
Mhm.
because, of course, as you would know, they're
They're
not
very young.
elders
Yeah,
in any way; they're young kids.
yeah.
Come to my door one day. Actually, they came to my yard. I was putting out Christmas decorations, which I still do, and they asked if they could help. And in return, they would want to come and speak to me. So I said, sure. They put up all my Christmas lights. It was great. Then they came in and chatted with me for about an hour. I said, you can talk to me, but I also get to talk to you. So we actually had a really excellent conversation. But what really, I didn't know this before, but it surprised me that they're actually not even allowed to read any books that are not approved by their church while they're on their mission, their year-long mission. So, they might get exposed to other ideas.
And obviously, when you're sort of on the outside of a high control situation like that, you can see the obvious reasoning behind having rules like that. It's like, we don't want anything to threaten your faith. We want you to keep, true to this mission, um, which is evangelizing your religion during these 2 years that you're on the mission. But I it's so sad because it makes me wonder how is it described to them in the church, and how is it so how does somebody take something like that? And I get why they wouldn't see the purpose of it, but what is the mental gymnastics that goes on to justify closing off information?
I think I asked that question, and I think the answer was about not being distracted
Right.
from the work, maintaining your focus and your true presence with God
Mm,
in order to do the work.
it's such a bummer.
But yeah, mental gymnastics is required,
Right.
I think, in that kind of work.
Yeah. And it's like I loved your answer to that question too, because you're so right. Like, having exposure to various ideas and then deciding, or whether it's a intellectual decision, whether it's an emotional decision or spiritual decision. I mean, I don't think anybody could actually parse those things out anyway, but then deciding, this is the path that is true for me, this is the thing that I want to do, but I am doing it of my own volition. I have looked at my options and I have chosen the one that is best for me. That is democracy, that is freedom. And saying that, you know, we shall have no faith anywhere near us and everything needs to be wholly secular all the time is sort of just the equal and opposite in some ways of somebody saying, we should only have our religious texts around us at all time. Like, there has to be an
Right.
openness.
There has to be an openness to explore those ideas. And I think if you look at the trends in places where people do have fairly free access to information, the number of religious people is going
It
down.
is, yeah.
I think it's a natural occurrence because it sort of doesn't make sense. Religion.
Mhm.
Once you really start, once you really start looking into it,
Yep.
it sort of unravels. Like for myself, I was raised Catholic. I, at the age of 12, asked my mom if I could be an altar boy, and she looked at me like, "No, you cannot be an altar boy." And I said, well, this is stupid then. I'm not. So, like, right there, for me, that was sort of the beginning of the end. And then, I don't know why I was sort of born a feminist. It just, it certainly wasn't part of my community or my family, but it just struck me as like so unjust that I could not be an altar boy.
Because it is.
And then, by the time it is, of course it is. I think now you
Yeah.
can,
Oh, that's
because they
good.
ran out of,
Right.
well, let's not get into
Yeah.
that, but
I know where you're
um,
going with that. Yeah, yeah. Fill in the blanks there.
yeah, um, no, yeah, yeah. I don't want to say that, but yeah. So, but then by the time I was 18 and I was in university and I was I took a mythology class, and like ancient mythology, and that's where it totally unraveled for me, because I, learned about the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the flood story, and how old that story is, and how then it was seems to just have been co-opted, and so then the whole thing kind of just the threads just unraveled for me. um, and but that through sort of an awareness, access to information and education.
Yeah, it's interesting. I see that even for individuals who maintain their religious beliefs, those who are more highly educated or maybe just who have more access to, alternative points of view, I find that they do tend to be less um uh fundamentalist. So you'll see somebody who is quite religious, like who's studying in a theology, or in a, what do you call it? Whatever, at a university, like so they're getting like doctorate degrees in their religion, but there is usually much more of a sort of um, understanding of the mythology. It's sort of an understanding of the religion and the science and how they can play nice with each other, as opposed to this like fundamentalist, translation of a Bible, or some sort of fundamentalist understanding that is dogmatic in nature. That's just something that comes with critical thinking. So even if you still believe in the core of the religion, you're probably not going to have as much magical thinking the more exposure and education you have.
Yes, absolutely. And I also think that there are probably a number of people who are working in religion, as clergy members, or that who actually don't believe, but are too far in to really be able to explore that publicly. Anyways, we run a group through the Rocky Mountain Atheists called Life Without Religion, and we have a number of ex-pastors, people who worked for usually Christian organizations, and have to be anonymous. It has to be like a secret meeting because they're not out. They would lose their jobs, right? So I think sometimes when you do get to that level where you're really thinking about it that much and studying about it that much, sometimes it unravels on its own, but you might be too far in. There's also the Clergy Project, which is a big organization, and that's what their entire purpose is to work with people, have support for people who are in practicing clergy members, but no longer believe.
And it's so unfortunate that there isn't support within. So, and the hope is, I guess, that some of the more sort of progressive or liberal faith organizations do support some of those individuals. I can't imagine that there's like no church out there, like some Unitarian church who has, non-believers but really believe in the mission of the church, because I think it leads to the question for a lot of people listening who are like, why would these people want to stay in the clergy if they don't actually believe in God? But that's their life and that's what they're trained to do, and they often are doing very good work. Like, I have a friend in the medical setting who is a chaplain, but she goes she calls herself an interfaith chaplain because she can work with any religion, but she's secular in her approach. She's quite adaptive to different people's needs, but like, I can't speak for her, but I think she might be a non-believer. And there's space for that. There's space for non-believers in chaplaincy or in these different, what we think of as historically faith-based roles, because they don't actually have to have a whole lot to do with faith.
There are a lot of reasons that churches, that those communities are good for people. And the research has really shown that it's about the community that you build, but I think it's also about the sense of purpose, or the good works, the community service that some of those churches engage in. And I think there is actually a minister of the United Church in Canada, Greta Vosper, who is an atheist, and she is still practicing as a minister, in the United Church. And I've had an opportunity to meet her, and her story is really funny. She just was standing at the pulpit one day, and she just stopped in the middle of her sermon and said, "I'm really sorry, but I can't keep doing this. I don't believe this." And then fully expected for them to kick her out, and they didn't. And this is important because she now runs her sermons based on what is happening in the world. What are some of the good things that we can do as part of this community? What are the things that we should be learning about? They've replaced Bible study with book club, and they study different things. It's actually a really good way to bring people together. And that's also really one of the reasons that we started the Rocky Mountain Atheists, is because people need a community. We're very social. We need a community of people to come together. We need to mark the passage of time through our traditions, and that's a lot of what the church does, right? What the religious
Yeah,
structures
like
do.
ritual and
I
yeah, that's a huge
Exactly.
part of
Ritual
it.
is so important.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so we try to do that in a way that is helpful. Like we have a winter solstice event every year in December. That around Christmas time can be a very difficult time for people who've left religion. Some people are estranged from their families because of it, and so we want to have those traditions built into our community so that people do feel like they're part of things. We also do a lot of community service. We do regular blood drives. We do community cleanups. We've adopted a highway, so part of a highway that's our responsibility to clean every year. We're sponsoring a refugee to come from Pakistan. So the church doesn't have to have the monopoly over those good works either, right?
Right. Right. And it's yeah, there's so much space for all of it in a way, so long as it is um inclusive, diverse, equitable, which is sadly not often the case within many, not all, but many religious organizations. And so that sort of takes me back to another point that you made when you were kind of comparing the work that you do in education with the work that you do um, with the Rocky Mountain Atheists is sort of this, you spoke for a bit about opportunity for information and for knowledge, and who are the stakeholders, who are the individuals who are making policy decisions in our various countries, who are the people who historically held power, and what were the books that they were learning from, what are the myths that they are forming their moral and ethical viewpoints on. But I think there's this whole second layer here, which is like a perfect parallel, which is that within the atheist community, we've struggled with that. Within the atheist community, those same themes and motifs are being recapitulated over and over. It's like these, older white men with these academic appointments who have these new atheist beliefs and values, who in many ways have shaped the landscape of what is talked about, what is taught, what kind of topics are brought up, and what the perspectives are on those topics. And I'm so thrilled to see the work that you do to try to dismantle some of that, because it is literally the same toxic bullshit within the atheist community that you see within any larger community. It's just steeped in misogyny and racism and all of those different systemic structures that we've long been subjected to.
Totally. You know, the sort of new atheism was founded by the four horsemen, the older white men who steered us, and they had a lot of good things to say in
Of course
in
they
the
did.
time,
Yeah,
but they
yeah.
were operating from a place of absolute power and privilege. And these fights that we want to look at now, they're not their fights. They're not affected by things like sexism and racism. So I don't know if it's a blind spot, or almost a reactionism that I think has happened in the movement. When we've started name calling, people who are woke, or people who are social justice warriors. This is what I'm hearing a lot in the skeptical or atheist community, and it's astounding to me, because why would you not want to be woke? Why would you not want to be a warrior for social justice? Is that not, haven't we learned, the roots of a lot of, or maybe not the roots of patriarchy, or of some of these negative things isn't in religion, but certainly widely reinforced by religious practice and religious belief. And so why wouldn't we turn our skeptical eye on some of those things as well? We really do need to we really do need to sort of broaden our gaze to see some of the more insidious ways, I think, that religion has really infiltrated our worldviews, what we think is important, what we don't, and unpack some of that, instead of just focusing on some of these more narrow things that maybe the grandfathers of our new atheism were thinking about. Uh, we need more
Yeah,
women in this movement for sure.
y- and that's really like, do you I personally believe, and I mean, I guess I don't know how much this is based in evidence, but I personally believe that some of those viewpoints and some of those positions, when we think about sort of the new atheist movement, it's, yes, a lot of it was a counter to um, religion, and but it I feel like the positioning often had less to do um with rights of individual people. Sort of had less to do with, I don't want to say quote unquote freedom, but like liberty of individuals, and like civil rights and social justice, and more to do with this sort of like intellectual tug of war of like some sort of purity movement. Like if you are a non-believer, you somehow have more a better understanding of how the world works, or you have a more kind of pure view of science. It was very pro science, very anti anything that could have been um, deemed in like indigenous knowledge or folk knowledge. Like there's the new atheist movement was very, very anti that in a way that made me think that regardless of what the views themselves were, they were still steeped in misogyny and racism. Like it wasn't about the fact that, oh, religion is misogynistic and racist and we want to counter those terrible things. It was like, everything is misogynistic and racist and we are a part of that and we just want to go religion stupid. Like that's how it felt to me. It didn't feel like there was a movement to dismantle these systems of oppression at all in the kind of new atheist movement. And if anything, they wanted to maintain them because it helped them with their power positions.
Sure. Or maybe that wasn't conscious, but certainly, that's the thing about privilege, is it's really hard to see when you're privileged. Yeah. I think also based in a very specific kind of science, in the natural sciences, and with a disdain for social science and any other kind of knowledge. I'm an anthropologist by training, a medical anthropologist. And when I look sort of cross culturally, like you could take the trans issue for example, cross culturally, uh, we're definitely in the minority of cultures who have a binary understanding of gender.
Yeah.
And yet that is because there's a biology that people are referring to. That seems to be the trump card, right? Like that's the only kind of science that counts.
Right. Yeah. And you see that very out loud in within our very community. There are a handful of very, very intelligent, but I believe misguided people whose voices have a lot of power. making those claims. And it's the part that's so bizarre to me is like why they're so passionate about it. It's like I don't understand why you care so much about like limiting somebody else's rights and having a point of view that like doesn't affirm them as human beings. It just seems so not humanistic. But you're right. There's
Exactly.
this almost glomming on um to a type of twisted version of science. I liken it unto logical positivism. It's the one term that I tend to use because I think about the philosophical underpinnings of the sciences or of the scientific method. And logical positivism is a sort of view which is pretty I don't know. It's a kind of a fundamentalist view when it comes to science. And it has a lot of different traits about it and a lot of different philosophy's complicated, but just sort of that like the only things that are meaningful are things that we can analyze. And so you take that to its extreme, like the only things that we can say are worthwhile to talk about within a scientific setting are things that we can fundamentally test scientifically. If you can't test it scientifically, it's not part of the natural world and you can't perform an experiment on it, it's not even meaningful to discuss. And so when you have that really deep view, it starts to discount a lot of very humanistic thought. And like you said, the humanities are sort of treated like they're less than or like they're not actually telling us anything about the world. It's quite a fundamentalist view.
And in some ways, parts of that is built on a house of cards because it is based on a premise of objectivity, which yes, there is objectivity in some things. You can measure some things objectively, but how do you decide what to measure in the first place? That's not an objective decision.
Right.
What kind of things
Or
do you
how you're going to
decide
measure
to
it.
exactly? What do you decide to research in the first place? Who do you recruit as your study participants? Are we going to only recruit men of a certain age because women's hormones are too complicated and they'll mess up your study, right? So this it's built on a foundation that we can be objective in these things, and to a certain extent maybe, but we really need to look at these things from multiple viewpoints,
And that really
or
is
we're
the
not
big
going to actually get to the
fallacy,
truth.
right? Right. I feel like this big fallacy is that those who historically and in the present have privilege and power because of the blind spot that comes with privilege and power, right? I don't have to worry about politics. I am apolitical. Well, it's easy for somebody for whom every political decision that's being made privileges them to say that, right? If you've never been somebody who had to fight for your rights, politics didn't matter to you. And so it's sort of this self-perpetuating thing where the individuals with privilege and power, they believe that that is the default position. They don't see that as privilege and power. They see it as the status quo. Well, things are this way because that's the natural order. There's some sort of essentialism to it. This is just how things should be. And it's very hard for individuals in that position to appreciate something like the patriarchy. I mean, it's why there's so much work being done to make it as obvious as possible. And it's why there's such a backlash to things like the Barbie movie, right? Like it offended people's sensibilities. Um,
Which is the
but
silliest thing ever.
it's so silly. I know, so silly. But that's the part that's so frustrating to me is the fact that within this community of, a parent or supposed like deep critical thinkers, all the critical analysis goes out the window the minute that their own positions of privilege and power are threatened. It's sad.
and the and it's because the people who are in those positions are there because the system benefited them to be in those positions. In education, we talk about different ways that people should be able to access information, access content. I'm a big proponent of universal design for learning, which states that you just assume that there's a diversity of people in your courses, and you should design your course so that somebody who likes to read can get their information, but somebody who wants to watch it on a video can also get their information, or listen, or etc. But there's a bias because the people who are teaching the classes are people who did well in education in the traditional sense. So their default setting is to assign written work and reading as the gold standard of how you attain knowledge. And then the same is true for people in any kind of privilege or power position, with some exceptions. Most of those people got there because the way the system is set up benefits them. It plays to their strength.
Right. So then it becomes this self-perpetuating machine.
Totally.
Ugh, and it's like, I don't know, I'm so reminded. I've been home all weekend, and I have been binging on documentaries, and I watched a new documentary that just came out about the children's television show Reading Rainbow, which was really important to me in my childhood, hosted by LeVar Burton. Was that big in Canada? Did it kind of cross over into Canada? Do you know Reading Rainbow?
I
Ring a
I
bell?
think so, but I think it was
Maybe, but probably not the same.
yeah.
Yeah, if it's like, I think so. Because for us, it's like anybody of a certain age is like reading Rainbow. They can sing the theme song. They can do everything.
Mm,
And so, as I'm watching this documentary, there's this part where the executive producers are talking about how they focus group literally everything, every book that they want to cover, every story that they want to tell. They had to focus group with a bunch of kids, and it was like the purest, most obvious explanation of why, but it was so meaningful. She was like, we're a bunch of adults trying to make kids programming. Like, we're all trying to guess what kids like, but we're not kids. We really don't know what's going to resonate. We don't know what matters. We think we know, but we have to ask the kids. They'll tell us if we're off the mark, if that's boring or if that's, scary or if that's too much or that's not enough. Because we constantly underestimate kids' minds. We always think that that theme is too adult, they won't get it, or, we don't want to plant this thing, or their imagination is going to go too far with this or whatever. We have to ask them. It's like the simplest, solution to this problem. And
that's
yet,
right.
exactly what we're talking about is the people aren't being asked. Just the people in
Yep,
power just keep making
that's right.
assumptions.
You have to make seats
Ugh.
at the table for everyone. There's a mantra that came out of the disability movement. I think Simi Linton said this first: "Nothing about us without us." Which I try to live my life by. All the work that I do. I'm not a member of all of the groups, all of the equity deserving groups that I serve. So we ask those questions. What is it that you need?
Yeah.
How can your voice
Yeah,
be
it's such a
heard?
simple concept, isn't it? Why is it why is it so rarely, sadly, executed? And I mean, that's not to minimize the individuals and the organizations that do ask and that do execute this very simple formula, because of course I think that there's so much good work being done across the globe, and we are moving slower than we'd like, but we are moving in a direction in several areas um, toward diversity and equity and inclusion. The problem is we're also seeing a massive backlash. I know at least here in the States, we're seeing legislation that's attempting to be passed in several jurisdictions to actually disallow that kind of progress. Are you seeing as much pushback in Canada?
We're not seeing it as much, but I fear that it's coming. I always say, in Canada, we sort of have like a front row seat to what's going on in the States. We can sit here and eat our popcorn and watch CNN and see what y'all are doing down there. Um,
Hmm.
and
Good
it's
use of y'all, liking that.
yeah. Um, it's been for me frightening to watch what's
Right.
happening
Yeah.
over the past several years. And you see something like the overturning of Roe v. Wade. I don't think that's going to happen in Canada, but that was a concerted effort by the religious right. They have been working on that for 50 years. They have a lot of money. They've done a lot of lobbying, and they've, patiently kept, doing test cases to try to see when they could start dismantling that. That comes from religion. The a lot of the uh, anti DEI in the states, I think you say, work legislation that's been passed is also coming from that same far right religious fundamentalist uh, lobby groups, and that is also a really good reason that these two things are tied together, because that is stopping that's really stopping the progress of our community, of our societies.
It's
And
super
we have to be
scary.
able
Are
to
you seeing
challenge. Yeah,
mhm.
we
No,
we have
finish
to
your
be able
thought.
to challenge that kind of thinking, right? We have to
Oh,
be able to say
100%.
this is based in religion. We have to be able to see those through lines of like who's saying it, why are they saying it, what are they basing that thought on, and then going to the source. Yeah.
Right, and where are they getting their funding, for sure. Are you seeing a kind of a rise? I mean, I know that sort of the social, um what do they call it? I think they call it the Oberlin window, right? Like what would be considered moderate. Obviously, in the United States, has shifted so far to the right because the right wing is becoming so much more extreme. And I do, or at least it's our thought down here, that in Canada, that window of what's considered moderate is farther left, just like it is in a lot of European countries, that there are still just certain social programs that are accepted as the way things should be. And to take them away, people would be up in arms because a lot of those social programs don't exist here. It's harder for us to have that kind of movement, right? But I'm curious, in Canada, are you seeing a rise of like a far right movement? And are they actually making any, like getting any traction or making any progress?
We that all is true. We're definitely further to the left than you
Okay.
are. So even
Yeah.
our most far right wouldn't compare to what you're seeing there. But we do have some fringe elements in in Alberta right now. We have a pretty far right provincial government that did just recently introduce some new legislation, some anti-trans legislation, which is the harshest that we've seen in Canada, which limits people's ability to use their preferred names in school without making sure that parents have given permission for that. That limits hormone blocking, puberty blocking, sorry, medications. So we are seeing some of that creeping in. But there are some things in Canada that I think are untouchable. We have universal health care. I don't think anyone would ever. I mean, it would be political suicide to try to
Exactly.
go after that. But
And
there
that's the
are
case, I think,
some.
in any country where they have that. Like, if we had that in the US and we got used to it, you wouldn't be able to take it away. People would realize the benefit.
Yeah, it's astounding to me that you can get cancer in the States and like your entire financial you're in ruins. Here we
Uh-huh.
think if you get cancer you should get treatment for that, but you should still be able to have your house. you know it's astounding to me. Yeah.
I mean, it's good to hear. It's so scary to hear about this rise of the right wing. And the thing that's so scary to me is that it's not just here in the States, right? Like, I'm seeing it in like little pockets of examples um, all over Europe as well. And it's I said this recently on my 500th episode, that the place where I kind of hold on to hope or am able to sort of not get too lost in my own despairing is that often I think that these right wing or like ultra religious movements are a pushback against um, secularism and liberalism and progress and diversity and equality. That, like, when the old guard feels their power and privilege slipping, they come out guns blazing. And so sometimes we see this horrible, horrible stuff going on and we think, oh my God, look at what we've become. But another perspective of that is this is a dying grasp. But like, of course they're going to kind of come out guns blazing because actually, if you look at sort of you know, the long view, we're making more progress towards humanistic decision making and policy. Do you agree with that?
We absolutely are, and
Okay. Yeah.
I really hope that that's right. The flailing around of a drowning,
Right. Yeah.
person trying to take everybody down with them.
Right. Yeah. I do too. I mean, it's hard to look at it that way because, as you said before, there are these kind of policy changes, like overturning Roe v. Wade has been in the works since Roe v. Wade was passed. But again, that's because it was a response to Roe v. Wade being passed. It's been a long response. And so I love, I have to say that I love that we've been able to talk about these important topical, political, sociocultural issues in a way that sometimes I do find that within the skeptic movement, there's a little bit of reticence or a little bit of fear to sort of go there. I guess out of concern that it, I don't know, somehow is like makes the movement less centralized or less, but like that's a good thing. And so I'm curious when it comes to the Western Canadian, uh, I wrote it so funny. I was writing down the title of the conference that you that you co-chair, and it's We Can Reason, right? Western Canadian Reason Conference. I wrote the Western Canadian Conference because that's what I do. Like, no, that's not what it's called. So it like took me a second. But when we think about the Western Canadian Reason Conference, We Can Reason. So the one that I spoke at was the second one, right? Or was it the third?
We had originally conceived of this we were going to have our first one in 2020. So, as that had to be put on hold for, a reason. So we have this community of skeptics that, is very active, and but we saw this happening in the world, this sort of deterioration of reason, of skepticism, of people, truthiness and misinformation and disinformation and all the polarization that was happening, and scientific illiteracy. And we thought, what is a way that we might be able to start kind of countering that? And so we thought, let's see if we can make a conference work. Let's see if this conference can be about a community of people coming together and having conversations about these issues, and maybe a few calls to action for people if they want to get involved in some of these issues. About, we had people talking about uh, stopping prayers in municipal meetings. We have some folks working on those kinds of issues. We've talked a lot about. We still have a Catholic school board in a few of our provinces that's
Oh,
publicly funded.
interesting.
Parallel,
Okay.
we have a public school system and a Catholic school system that's publicly funded. So we get involved in trying to figure out how we can help to move that along, that conversation along. So we founded this conference with that idea in mind, and it has been just a wonderful weekend of people getting together, and learning from one another, and really solidifying that committee outside of just the city that we live in, but it's sort of become a whole Western Canadian, and we even draw some from the Western United States as well into the conversation.
Yeah, and what at least I noticed is that it's not just about sort of missions and those objectives that you mentioned, but it's also doing it in a way that bolsters representation and elevates the voices of folks who just don't usually have that much of a platform, sadly, within the skeptic community. Like they're there, and periodically you'll see these really interesting people giving talks at different conferences, but often not the headliners, often not the people who, the promotion is being paid to, or at least drawn to. And so, not only is this really important activism happening at your conference, but it's also happening in a way that celebrates diverse voices. And I don't want to say you're one of the only people doing that, because I do think there is more of a movement to do that now, but it's still pretty rare.
It was a very conscious choice. We have I have such a great committee of people. My partner Adrian Hill and I made a decision. She's the co-chair. We made a decision early on that we were going to have gender parity in our conference board and in our speaker lineup. That we were going to look for a diversity of opinions. That this was as important a part of this conversation that we're having. It's not going to be a religion bashing conversation. It's going to be thoughtful. It's going to be about how do we build a community? How do we help build a world that we want to live in?
I love that. And I remember sitting down at the opening sort of remarks to start the entire weekend, and there was a slide that you put up, and obviously maybe you can help me with what the language on the slide said, but it really struck me. It was something about how you wanted to foster, difficult conversations and sometimes, healthy debate, but that we should be debating ideas, not people.
Our respectful conversation um, sort of clause that we have that on every meeting that we do. Every time we do a skeptics in the pub event, we always sort of state that up front. We're here to debate. We're here to challenge ideas and to think differently. Speak up and bring your thoughts. Be ready to be challenged, but also we're going to do that in a very respectful way. We're going to challenge ideas, not people. We're going to do that based on evidence. We're not going to attack anyone. We're going to foster a dialogue.
That's so important, and for some reason, I never see that. I know, and I go to a lot of these things, and I think a lot of people do work to have these sort of rules of engagement, and this is the place that you can go to if you're worried that harassment has taken place, or we are seeing more and more movement in that area. But just something as simple as saying, like, we're debating ideas here. We're not just shitting on each other. Like, it's so
Yes.
simple, but I think it needs to be said out loud.
And it needs to be reinforced by our actions. This is a diverse community, and I should just state right really clearly, I don't represent the viewpoints of everyone at Rocky Mountain Atheists or at the We Can Reason conference. We have a diverse group of people, and that's on purpose because we want to honor all of those viewpoints. And we have very lively debates at our board meetings about, who we're going to have come and speak and what they represent, and is that what we're going to represent as a group, and it's okay if we don't all agree, and all of those. We're trying to really model that kind of behavior. So there are definitely people who are members of this group who disagree with a lot of the things that I've said, and that I say, and that is fine because I also want my ideas to be challenged. And I hope that we've built a community for that. And that community is built on mutual trust, and it's that happens by spending time together as a group, by earning people's trust that you're going to act in that way. And we've been really intentional outside of the We Can Reason conference, which is like our biggest event that we hold annually. We have a monthly book club. We have a monthly Skeptics in the Pub event, where we have a topic that we discuss and debate. We always show sort of two sides of the story, and then we debate what we think. Well, not debate, but discuss. Um, we have we bring in speakers regularly. We have webinars every month. We do music nights. We actually have a house band that has grown out of our community called the Heathens. Um, and we bring people together in these ways because building a community then lends itself to the safety that you need to have those kinds of conversations.
Right. That's such an important word, I think, is safety. And it's never going to feel safe if certain people are made to feel like they cannot exist, for fear of judgment, or for fear of their identities being dismissed or minimized. And so it's just it's such a basic thing, but clearly it does not come easily for a lot of people. And so it's
Right,
so
right.
important, I think, right, that when it is occurring, um that we talk about it, that we make space for. I mean, that's why I wanted to have you on the show, is to talk about how this can be done, and it can be done well. And, nobody's perfect and nobody has a perfect formula. But so long as that is your goal, your express goal, you're always working towards it. And that's like, you know, that's what we need to be doing. And so I'm just so appreciative of the work that you're doing. I'm appreciative of being invited to be involved in my small way. And I guess the last thing I want to ask here in this hour, Janalee, is there anything that we haven't talked about with regards to your work, with regards to the Rocky Mountain Atheists, with regards to the Western Canadian Reason Conference? Is there anything that we haven't mentioned, or that you'd like to make sure is spoken before I bid you adieu?
I guess I'm just reflecting a little bit on that statement, on our discussion inclusion statement, and I'm remembering that that partly came out of sometimes we have folks who show up to our group who are not skeptics and not atheists. We have had flat earthers come out to some of our events. We've had creationists show up at some of our events, and I think we made that decision to say everyone is going to be welcome in this space, because I think even if you're coming with the idea that you're going to convert us or save our souls, you're there's a reason that you could come out to a group like this. It's likely that you might have some questions as well, and if we just chase you away, call you stupid or mock you for your beliefs, then you're not ever going to be able to explore what skepticism has to offer, and ways to think. And I see more and more. So religious participation is declining, but what I think is increasing is things like people going to psychics, people using crystals, or people reading tarot cards, or I think along that path is even people who are into QAnon or conspiracy beliefs, because they are looking for that community. They're looking for someone to lead. They're looking for some answers or some meaning to be built
And a
into
way
their lives. And
to feel special too. I think
that's
that's
right.
important, to feel special.
That's right. That's right. What's more special than to think that, there's someone in the sky looking, caring so deeply about, every single thought that comes through your head. That's pretty special. Um,
Yeah.
and
Or that you
so,
have
if
access to knowledge or information that others don't have, like we know these things that other people don't know. We have this, privileged access to, I mean, I think that's a huge part of why people believe in conspiracies.
absolutely, and because they're looking for that, we're looking for that, and in the absence of religion, people will find different ways to fill that void. And so, I hope that skepticism is there, is open for people of all stripes to come in and learn from, and use as a tool in order to make this world a better place.
I love that so much. And I love the way that you position that it is a tool, that you are not seeking out to deconvert, that you are not trying um to evangelize a worldview that would somehow threaten another worldview. But it's just like you were talking about with the missionaries who you invited into your home. Your goal was not to deprogram them. Your goal was not to make them not Mormon anymore or make them secular skeptics. It was to show them that there are other options available, and that we really cannot make an empowered choice unless we know what choices we have. And I think that the skeptic movement it's such an important piece of that puzzle. And the work that you're doing, both with Rocky Mountain Atheists and the Western Canadian Reason Conference, We Can Reason, are a huge step in that direction. So Janalee, I just want to thank you for all of the incredible work that you're doing, and also for taking time out of your busy day to be here with us and to share your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Kara, and right back at you. Thanks for all you're doing for this movement as well.
Oh, and everybody listening, thank you for what you're doing for the movement and also for coming here week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.